course, a huge victory. She took out the defending champion in the previous round. Such an easy player to like and to get behind. Really wears her emotions on her sleeve.
Nobody warned center court what was about to happen, and that's exactly why it felt so unbelievable. A 21-year-old walked onto the most famous tennis court in the world, and half the crowd didn't even know how to pronounce her name. 10 days later, that same stadium was on its feet, waving flags no one had expected to bring. Back home, fans were staying awake until 3:00 a.m. just to replay her highlights again and again. What unfolded wasn't just another tennis story. It was the kind of journey that makes you feel like you're watching history being rewritten in real time. And if you think you already know how it ends, think again. Because the biggest twist wasn't the victory. It was everything that happened after the defeat. 8 days earlier, almost nobody had her advancing far in the tournament. She was little more than a footnote in most predictions. A player expected to survive the opening round, maybe reach the second if everything went perfectly, and then quietly disappear before the tournament's second week. That was the script everyone else had written for her. The only problem was that she never agreed to follow it. She grew up training on courts that weren't always full-sized, and were often shared with other sports. In a country where tennis talent has long exceeded the facilities available to develop it, every step forward demanded extra determination. So when she finally stepped onto the pristine grass of the sport's most iconic stage, many wondered whether the pressure would overwhelm her. Her first major challenge wasn't an unknown opponent. It was the defending champion, Iga Swiatek, a player famous for dismantling opponents with ruthless precision. For a set and a half, the match unfolded exactly as most people expected. Then, somewhere in the middle of the second set, something changed so subtly that even the commentators nearly missed it. If you watch that moment closely, you'll notice it wasn't a dramatic celebration or a lucky shot. It was in her eyes. They never drifted from the baseline. The nerves disappeared, the belief took over, and from that point on, the match became something no one had predicted. Not once a warning, then an opponent. It was a small detail, but it revealed everything. Her swings became more confident. Her footwork grew sharper, getting her into position a split second earlier with every rally. There was nothing flashy about the transformation, no dramatic outburst or emotional celebration, just a steady, almost invisible shift that unfolded point by point until the wall everyone expected her to crash into simply wasn't there anymore. Then came match point. Swiatek's final return drifted long, and for a single, unforgettable second, center court fell completely silent. No cheers, no applause, no movement. It was as if thousands of people had forgotten how to breathe at the exact same moment. Then the realization hit. The roar erupted and refused to fade, because a player almost nobody expected had just defeated one of the greatest champions in the sport. Everyone inside that stadium understood they had witnessed a match that would be remembered for years. By sunrise, this was no longer just a tennis result. It had become the biggest story in the Philippines. Office workers were setting alarms hours before dawn just to watch the highlights before heading to work. Students with exams the next morning stayed awake anyway, unwilling to miss a moment of history. For an entire nation, sleep suddenly felt far less important than witnessing what one of their own had accomplished. Most stories like this end there. One unforgettable upset, a wave of headlines, and then reality returns in the next round. That's usually how fairy tales in sports are written. But this one refused to follow the script. Waiting in the fourth round was Jasmine Paolini, a Wimbledon finalist just 2 years earlier and one of the most natural grass court players left in the tournament. Her game was perfectly suited to the surface. Flat, fast, and relentlessly efficient. While many players simply adapted to grass, Paolini seemed built for it. And there was another layer to this matchup, one that wouldn't appear in the highlight packages but lingered quietly in both players' minds. Earlier that year, in February, they had met on the hard courts of Dubai. Alex Eala hadn't just beaten Paolini that day, she had completely dominated the match, leaving no doubt about who was in control. Paolini had carried that loss quietly for 5 months, waiting for the right stage to answer it. When the draw brought them together again, this was no longer just the story of an underdog making an unexpected run. It had become something far more personal, unfinished business. The rematch carried weight that couldn't be measured by rankings alone. As they walked onto center court, the atmosphere felt different. Fourth-round crowds are usually patient, settling into their seats before the drama begins. This crowd wasn't. It was loud before the first ball had even been struck. There was an edge to the noise, the sound of thousands of people convinced they were about to witness history. That kind of belief changes the energy inside a stadium. You can feel it long before the match itself tells you who's right. Alex glanced toward the stands, where Philippine flags had suddenly become impossible to miss. Flags that hadn't been there just a week earlier. Paolini never looked up. Not once. Her focus stayed locked on the court, as if nothing beyond the white lines even existed. The opening point only fueled the excitement. Alex fired a serve wide, forcing Paolini into a desperate stretch that barely kept the ball in play. The crowd exploded, as though the tournament had already been won. It was too early for that kind of celebration, but nobody seemed to care. For a brief moment, it felt as though the fairy tale was destined to continue. Then, everything changed. Just 2 games later, Alex pushed a routine forehand into the net, a shot she would normally make without thinking. Paolini held serve. Then she held again, somewhere during that stretch, so subtly that almost nobody noticed the exact moment. The match transformed. What had looked like a coronation became a fight. A real one. Momentum began changing hands with every few points, slipping back and forth like a magician's card trick that no one could follow. Alex had the crowd behind her. Paolini had the scoreboard. And the gap between those two things is often where the biggest matches are decided. At 30 all, the tension reached another level. A rally stretched beyond 10 shots, each player refusing to surrender even a single inch of the court. The pace quickened. The angles grew tighter. And then, in an instant, Alex's return clipped the very edge of the line and died on the grass before Paolini could reach it. Breakpoint. Alex stepped inside the baseline, almost daring Paolini to go for a big second serve. It was a calculated gamble, an invitation to take a risk. Paolini accepted it. The decision backfired. Alex's return skimmed through the court before Paolini had even committed to a direction. Break. For a brief moment, it felt as though this was simply another chapter in the fearless fairy tale that had captivated the entire tournament. But Paolini wasn't about to let history repeat itself. Not against this opponent. Not after Dubai. She responded immediately, breaking back with a composure that was almost unsettling. There was no fist pump, no emotional release, just the quiet confidence of a player who had already survived pressure on this stage before. Even the commentators fell silent for a moment. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone suddenly realizes they're watching a very different match than they expected. The rallies grew longer, 10 shots, 12, sometimes even more. Neither player was willing to be the first to show fatigue. Every point became a test of patience as much as skill. Serving to stay level in the set, Alex found herself locked in another punishing exchange. The pace never let up. Then, on a ball she would normally chase down without a second thought, she made a rare mistake. Suddenly, it was break point again. Alex missed her target by only a few inches. Paolini didn't miss hers. That was the difference. Break. Alex smiled anyway. She nodded, more to herself than to her coaching box, as if reminding herself that the match was far from over. The message was clear enough, I'm not done yet. Paolini, however, never loosened her grip. Rather than simply protecting the advantage, she continued to apply pressure, point after point, until she closed out the opening set -6. The final score made the finish look comfortable, almost routine, even though every game had demanded absolute precision. As the players changed ends, Alex remained seated for a moment, staring across the court, replaying the missed opportunities in her mind, and searching for the adjustment that could change everything in the set to come. She sat there staring at her racket strings, almost as if the answer might be hidden somewhere between the lines. And, for the first time in the entire tournament, a real question settled over center court. It was heavy, almost loud enough to hear. Was this where the story finally ended? She didn't know it yet, sitting in that chair. But the next 4 games were about to completely rewrite that question. Because there was one thing almost nobody watching remembered in that moment. Earlier in the tournament, in a match that received barely any attention outside her home country, Alex had already been in this exact situation. She had already fought back from a set down once before. That match had disappeared from the headlines. Not after this run, not after the upset that captured the entire tennis world, but inside her own coaching box. That memory mattered. They had seen this version of Alex before. That was why nobody panicked, even when the scoreboard suggested they should. When she walked back onto the court for the 3rd set, she looked like a different player. Not reckless, not desperate, just freer. She started stepping inside the baseline against Paolini's second serve. taking away time before Paolini could use it against her. The crowd slowly rebuilt its energy. They were excited, but cautious, almost afraid to believe too soon. Yet they leaned forward anyway, because they couldn't help themselves. Alex held serve at love, and just like that, the rhythm of the match changed. The entire contest reset with one simple service game. Then, deep into Paolini's next service game, Alex began finding a different level. 3 returns landed deeper than anything she had managed earlier. The third came flat and explosive, driving straight through the middle of the court before Paolini had even completed her split step. Deuce, then deuce again. A let chord gave Alex a fortunate bounce, the kind of moment that can completely change a match, but only if a player is ready to take advantage of it. She was. No hesitation, no second thought. She stepped forward and ripped the next shot cross-court. Break. This time, the roar from the stands wasn't celebration. It was relief. The sound of an entire stadium finally releasing the breath it had been holding. But the match wasn't settled. Not yet. Serving to consolidate the break, Alex suddenly found herself in another dangerous moment. Down 15-30. Exactly the kind of score where a comeback can quietly disappear if a player loses focus for even a few seconds. But it didn't disappear. 2 perfectly placed first serves. A powerful forehand winner to finish the game. Hold. And somewhere in the stands, a small group of Filipino fans, who had traveled on almost no notice, were recording the moment with hands shaking too much to keep the camera still. They weren't just watching a match anymore. They were trying to capture a memory they already knew they would never forget. Paolini, however, refused to make the comeback easy. She responded immediately, holding serve and forcing Alex to keep earning every single point. But something had changed. The momentum had shifted, and this time, it felt permanent. Alex was lighter on her feet, faster into position, and playing with the belief that this set was not escaping her twice. Then came set point. Her serve went wide. Paolini's reply came back short. Alex stepped forward and unleashed a forehand into the open court. Winner. The third set belonged to Alex. The match was level. Somewhere in the crowd, a Philippine flag shot into the air so quickly that the person holding it nearly lost their balance. The stadium erupted. And for a moment, it felt like the perfect comeback story was writing itself exactly the way everyone wanted. This was supposed to be the turning point. The moment where the underdog completed the impossible. Except tennis doesn't care about the script anyone wants to see. The deciding set that followed was something completely different. Heavier, tighter, every single point carrying a weight the first 2 sets never had. Every rally felt like it could decide the entire match. Every mistake felt impossible to recover from. And there was one detail that mattered more than most people realized. Paolini had already been here before. She had played deciding sets on this stage during her run to the Wimbledon final 2 years earlier. Alex had not. Not at this level. Not with an entire nation watching. Not with a place in the quarterfinals hanging on every swing. Still, she kept playing with the same fearless aggression that had carried her past a Grand Slam champion days earlier. The same belief. The same willingness to attack. But Paolini had started making adjustments. She was reading the patterns a fraction earlier now, anticipating Alex's cross-court forehand before the ball had even left the racket. It was a small change, but at this level, small changes decide everything. Then, midway through the final set, came the game that felt like it lasted forever. A service game stretched across the entire stadium, played under a silence so tense it seemed like nobody wanted to breathe. Paolini had been waiting for this opening. And finally, she found it. 2 unbelievable defensive recoveries kept the point alive when it looked impossible. Alex pushed. Paolini absorbed. The pressure kept building, until, at last, the breakthrough arrived. The break she had been chasing since the very first point of the match. Break. And then, one backhand clipped the tape and fell on the wrong side. Break. But here's the part nobody expected. Center court didn't turn against her. It went silent. Not the silence of disappointment. The silence of thousands of people quietly willing one player to find something extra, something impossible, from somewhere deep inside. Everyone in the stadium knew they were watching the final moments of something special. For the next few games, it looked like Alex might actually pull off one more escape. She saved break points with 2 fearless first serves that had no business landing exactly where they did. She chased down shots that looked like guaranteed winners, and somehow kept sending them back. She walked between points with the same smile she had carried all match. Still believing, still fighting, still not finished. And somehow, that fight carried the match all the way into the final stages. Serving at 3-4, Alex faced the toughest stretch of the entire 2.5-hour battle. The pressure was everywhere. Deuce. Deuce again. A rally that stretched beyond 15 shots. Neither player willing to blink. Then finally, on break point, a backhand drifted just long. The opening appeared. Paolini took it. Break. And with it came the feeling that this incredible run had reached its final chapter. Paolini stepped up to serve for the match at -5. But Alex refused to simply let the moment pass. She attacked every return. She fought for every inch of the court. She played as if the scoreboard didn't exist, as if there was still another comeback waiting to be written. But Paolini had been here before. She knew what these moments demanded. She knew how to close matches on the biggest stages. One clean serve, one final forehand. Game, set, match. After 2.5 hours of some of the most gripping tennis of the tournament, it was over. The final score read 6-4, 4-6, -6. But that wasn't the part people remembered. Because what happened next was the moment that revealed everything about Alex Eala. She didn't collapse. She didn't break down. She walked straight to the net, shook hands with Paolini, and shared a genuine embrace with the player who had just ended her historic run. Then center court stood. Not for a champion lifting a trophy, not for a winner celebrating a title, for a 21-year-old who had spent 2 unforgettable weeks changing what people believed was possible. She left London as the first player from her country ever to reach the 4th round of Wimbledon, a record that hadn't existed 2 weeks earlier and now carried her name forever. Before she had even left the grounds, clips of her victory had already begun spreading across the world. Millions watched the upset. Millions more watched the fight against Paolini. The moments became proof that somewhere during that second week, this had stopped being just a tennis tournament story. It had become something bigger. And here's the twist. The part that mattered more than the final score. The scoreboard said she lost. But watch those 2.5 hours again, and you'll see something completely different. You'll see a player who refused to be intimidated by a champion. A player who stepped onto center court as an unknown and walked away as someone the world would never forget. The name across the net didn't matter anymore. Alex had clawed back from a set down against an opponent with real personal motivation for revenge. She had pushed a deciding set against a former Wimbledon finalist all the way to the final stages, while an entire country stayed awake past midnight just to watch every point. Paolini walked away, having finally answered the one result that had followed her around all season. But she would need every bit of that composure again just days later, because the next round brought another dangerous opponent, another packed stadium, and another player trying to write a story that ended hers. One door closed, another opened immediately. That's tennis. There is no time to fully celebrate a victory, no time to sit with a heartbreaking loss. The tournament keeps moving. Afterward, Alex's coach didn't say much. He simply stood near the tunnel, arms crossed, watching her walk away from the court. No dramatic speech, no big reaction, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened. Alex picked up her bag and took one final look around center court. The applause still hadn't stopped. And for the people who were there, it probably never will. 2 weeks earlier, almost nobody in professional tennis would have thought twice about the name Alex Eala. She was a promising young player, a talented prospect, someone with potential. That was no longer true. The entire sport had watched her introduce herself, not on an outside court, not away from the spotlight, but on center court itself. Twice, first against a defending champion, then against a former Wimbledon finalist, in front of cameras that had barely learned how to pronounce her name before that first Swiatek point sailed long into the London sky. Tennis moves fast. That's the brutal reality of the sport. New tournaments arrive. New headlines take over. Players can have the best week of their careers and still disappear from the conversation if they don't keep building on it. But some moments carry weight beyond the result. Some victories and defeats become bigger than rankings, draws, or statistics. Because this story was never just about where Alex finished in the tournament. It was about belief, her belief, and the belief of an entire nation that grew stronger match by match during a run nobody predicted and nobody who watched will forget. She walked through that tunnel, leaving behind the lights, the cameras, and the noise. Behind her, center court was already being prepared for the next match, the next player, the next story. That's how tournaments work. They move on. But this time, they didn't move on quite so easily. Because everyone inside that stadium left with something they didn't have 2 weeks earlier. A name they knew. A name they would remember. And if you were watching closely, you already knew one thing: they weren't going to stop watching for it.